Good afternoon, and a very warm welcome to you. We have a brand new monthly series. Now, as you're watching this, you may or may not be a person of faith. In fact, you might be skeptical about the truth of the Christian message. I mean, there are many people who think that what we believe is just a lot of fairy stories. But as Christians, the source of what we believe is the Bible. But is that really true? Can we rely upon what the Bible says? Is it historically accurate? Well, over the next few months, we're going to be looking at a few things to answer those questions. And today we're going to start with something that we read about towards the beginning of the Old Testament. And it's a waterway, in fact, which is called the Red Sea. And so today, I'm joined by Dale Norman, who has been doing some research into this, and he is going to share some of his conclusions. So welcome, Dale. And can I ask you, first of all, where is the Red Sea located?
Well, good afternoon, Richard. It's a joy to be on this panel, and I will just share the screen with us. Yes, well, I suppose I would like to give you maybe two answers on this question. One short one would be no one knows with 100% certainty. And the second answer would be that there are a couple of possibilities which we will look at. It'd be really helpful, I think, to look at a large map of the region so we know what we're talking about. We see we have Egypt there on the left, and there, that large body of water is the Red Sea. So we know we're dealing with this geographical location in some shape or form. Now, it was believed for the longest time by scholars, Egyptologists, that the crossing appeared or happened at the Gulf of Suez. If we look at those arrows, the Hebrews would have worked their way down through the country, through Egypt, and then they would have had a large body of water to cross. The Gulf of Suez is very deep, so we are talking about a large body of water here. Now, in our English Bibles, we see the phrase Red Sea. That's what we have in our English Bibles. Now, it is worth saying that the term Red Sea is not actually Hebrew, although some may think it is. The term Red Sea actually comes from the Greek version of the Hebrew Bible, which is known as the Septuagint, which is when the Greeks translated the entire Old Testament into Greek around 250 BC. So the term comes from there. Now, the Hebrew term is actually Yam Suth. Now, that term Yam Suth would go back to the time of Moses a lot earlier at 1450 BC. Now, the term Yam does mean sea, but a bit of question and speculation has come out on the word Suth. It is probably very likely that it does not mean red, and we know this because, ironically, the word for the color red is used more frequently in the book of Exodus than any other book in the Old Testament, when Moses describes the color in the tabernacle, some of the dye used in the tabernacle. So if Moses wanted to use the color red, he would have had a Hebrew word to do that, but it seems that he doesn't do that in this case. Now, some have suggested that the term Suth comes from the Egyptian word Partufi, and that is translated as Sea of Reeds. And I think a lot of people would have come across this phrase Sea of Reeds rather than Red Sea. So we need to ask ourselves, are we dealing with maybe a mistranslation, or has language changed? Now, because of that term Sea of Reeds, scholars started to move the crossing of the Red Sea from the Gulf of Suez to further north in Egypt to the border lakes, or the Sea of Reeds. It's still there today. And they shifted from a large body of water to a smaller body of water. And we'll get into a little bit more detail about that. So that translation, the Sea of Reeds, always demands that you place it in Egypt on a smaller level. Well, it's also worth saying that we're also dealing with 200 years, really, of Egyptology and the evolution of Egyptology. And over the course of time, scholars started to get uncomfortable with the large body of water because it would require a supernatural miracle for it to be moved. Whereas if you place it in a smaller lake, it could be moved by a natural scientific process. It is also worth saying that for the longest time, Mount Sinai was believed to be in the middle of those two bodies of water known as the Sinai Peninsula. But also, maps have changed over the last 200 years. And it is now believed that Mount Sinai is actually on the other side of the Gulf of Aqaba. So the location has completely moved. Now, we may ask ourselves why this sudden change. And one of the reasons for that is because here is a map from the 1700s. That is the Red Sea, that large body of water. And we notice that we have the Red Sea, we have the Gulf of Suez, but we do not have the Gulf of Aqaba. Here it is in red. It should be located there. And now for 200 years, this tradition continued that an entire body of water was off maps. It was not placed on maps until modern times. So what does that do to this story? We see now that we could have a new possible crossing, which is the Gulf of Aqaba. So we need to ask ourselves, did the Septuagint translators get it wrong when they used the term Red Sea? And I personally think that they didn't get it wrong. I think they use general geographical locations because it is the body of water that they were familiar with. But of course, they did not know about the existence of the Gulf of Aqaba. On top of that, it is also worth saying that in other parts of the Bible, it says that I will set your borders from the Red Sea, or Yam Suf, to the Sea of the Philistines and from the wilderness. And that, of course, places it directly towards the promised land. And so we come back to the question, what does Yam Suf actually mean? If it's not the Red Sea or the Sea of Reeds, some Hebrew scholars have suggested that it just means the Sea of the End, or the Sea of Destruction, which basically means you've reached the end of the body of water. And that would make sense with an Aqaba crossing because Aqaba points to the promised land. It is also worth saying that Aqaba is the only location where what could be chariot wheels have been discovered. Now, it has not been proven 100% if this is chariot wheels or if it is just coral, but none of the other bodies of water has these remains. So that's something to think about. And I think that would be a good place to start for our first question.
Okay, so that's absolutely fascinating, Dale, and a really good background to exactly where the Red Sea is. But obviously, the question arises: how did all this happen? Mm-hmm. How did all these, things get in place? Can you give us some light on that?
Absolutely, Richard. As we continue and we need to follow what happened in the story, we read that the Israelites were eventually allowed to leave the land by Pharaoh. But as they were crossing the wilderness and before they get to the body of water, Pharaoh then changes his mind and wants to pursue them once again. And God had, as we see, will split the water to let the Hebrews go on dry land. But of course, as the Egyptians attempted to do the same thing, that's when we see the event of God miraculously saving his people from danger and the waters crash down onto the Egyptians. So as you may have seen, I have suggested in my last answer 2 possible locations. One is the border lakes, the Sea of Reeds, because of the translation Sea of Reeds. And one is the Gulf of Aqaba because of this new body of water that was discovered. And the question comes now, Richard, in terms of how did God do it? We have 2 possible solutions. If we're going to stick with a Gulf of Aqaba interpretation, that would require a supernatural event on a large scale. So in other words, this is something that cannot be explained by science. It would take a divine being to move that body of water. If we go with a Sea of Reeds interpretation, it would move it to a natural scientific event on a small scale. So in other words, those shallow lakes in Egypt can be moved by natural scientific means such as wind or an earthquake or a volcano could move a body of water. So the question is, Richard, basically, did God use natural science for the event? Or did God sort of step outside the laws of physics and act in a divine supernatural way that science cannot explain? And I think one verse that has caused a lot of question on that is this verse, Exodus 14, 21, 22. And it says that Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and all night the Lord drove back the water with a strong east wind into dry land. And then it says the waters were divided, and the Israelites went through on dry land with a wall of water on the left and on their right. So here we see the identification of a strong east wind. Now, that could be God using the natural science of the wind to push it back. But would a shallow water create a wall of water? And what would a wall of water look like? Now, it's worth saying that Cecil B. DeMille, the film director, when he made the Ten Commandments twice, he was the first person that gave us a visual, and that is the image that we're very much used to. And we need to ask ourselves, is that a literal description of what a wall of water would look like? Now, if we go with the large body of water, it would have to look something like this. But as I said, there is no scientific explanation to move water like that. It would have to be a supernatural divine intervention. And it's worth saying that maybe some of the strengths and the weaknesses of either side. If I think when the Bible says that Pharaoh had 600 chariots or so, would a shallow body of water be enough to drown that many men and that all those chariots and horses? But of course, a Gulf of Aqaba crossing would certainly be enough water to drown Pharaoh and all his armies. Something else that we need to consider is that if the Hebrews crossed a shallow body of water, you notice there that they're still in the region of Egypt, which would still put them in danger. And really, when they crossed the Red Sea, they needed to feel safe. They needed to feel out of the Egyptians' hands. And so that's one of the problems I see with the shallow body of water, because the Egyptians could have very easily circled around the other side to catch them out. So that's something else to consider. Now, of course, those who hold to the shallow body of water interpretation say that the miracle was in the timing, that the wind moved the water at the exact right time when the Hebrews arrived there. So some accuse many of holding the Aqaba interpretation of sort of exaggerating the story a little bit by placing it in a large body of water. But I suppose it depends on how you weigh up the two views and how you view the way God interacts in the world.
Okay, thank you, Dale. Now, obviously, there were quite a lot of people there who went across. Have we any idea how many people that would have been? How many people actually crossed the sea?
Yes, that is a very good question. And it's worth saying, if we do have time, to maybe give a little bit of background, in that a lot of people do not see evidence for the Exodus today. One of the reasons for that is because of the verse in Exodus 1:11, which says they put slave masters over them to impress them, to force labor, and they built Pithom and Ramesses. That word Ramesses there indicates that that could be Ramesses II, the pharaoh of the Exodus. Now, that dates the Exodus to 1250 BC, and that is the date that is very criticized by scholars, saying that there is no evidence of a mass migration of people at the time of Ramesses. However, if we look in the Bible, there's another verse in 1 Kings 6:1, which says it was 480 years after the Israelites came out of Egypt. And if we date that from the time of Solomon's reign, that takes us to 450 BC. And that date, actually, 200 years before the Ramesses date, is the strongest historical date to see evidence for the Exodus. Now, does that mean that that translation of Ramesses is wrong in Exodus 1:11? But basically, what seems to be the case is that this phrase has been added in later by an editor. And we know that because in Genesis 47:11, it says Joseph settled his father and his brothers in the land of Egypt, gave them property in the best part of the land, the district of Ramesses of Pharaoh. The 100 years before the Exodus at the time of Joseph, they seem to have placed the word Ramesses then. So it seems that later editions of the Bible recognize the land of Ramesses, and they wanted to make that clear what land we're dealing with in the biblical text. So that's something else to consider. So I just give that as a background because the 1450 date does give us strong evidence of a mass migration of people in Egypt. It is believed that the Bible gives some indication of how many men there were, and that's not including the women, the children. Some would suggest that that would lead it up to 2 million Hebrews in Egypt. Now, of course, 2 million people would have to be the supernatural large event on the Gulf of Aqaba. The Egyptian approach on a smaller scale places it around 20,000. It all has to do with the Hebrew word elif, which translates as thousand. And does it mean small numbers of thousand or multiple numbers of thousand? But if we believe in God, which we do, we can believe that God protected 2 million people in the wilderness while crossing the Red Sea.
Okay, thank you, Dale. That's great. Yes, a lot of people there, 2 million people. But why did God do that? Why did God protect all of those people?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think the overall story is that the overall story of Exodus is a story that God looks out for his people, he protects them. And I will show you and demonstrate why I lean towards the Gulf of Aqaba approach, the supernatural approach. And it's also worth saying that there are people of faith in both camps, of course. Now, the text tells us that Pharaoh let the people of God go, but God did not lead them through the road of the Philistine country. And that, as you see those arrows, would lead them up the north. So that direction is out. And it's worth saying that I believe that when they left Egypt, Moses was not intending to come to a body of water. You know, he went to Midian, which is in the land of Saudi Arabia. He was returning to that land to get to Sinai. And as you look in that picture in the Sinai Peninsula, they can just make a very easy straight across path to the Midian area. But then God tells them, the Lord said to Moses and the Israelites, turn back and encamp at the near Pahiroth between Migdol and the sea. So God commands his people to turn back or change direction, which leads them to this body of water. And I think that's something else to consider, is that they got to this body of water and they would have felt terrified, knowing that they are trapped and Pharaoh's armies are on the way when Pharaoh changes his mind. And this is why I favor this interpretation, because when hope looks all lost and there is nothing that you can do and we feel stuck in the situation, that's when God intervenes and provides a miraculous miracle. And I think God did this to demonstrate his power, that he gained glory over Pharaoh, as the text says. But he also did this as something that the Hebrews would never forget. They would write about this in the Psalms. They would remember this for a millennia. And as we interpret that for our lives, you know, we have Red Sea moments today when all looks hopeless and lost, and God will intervene in some miraculous way, whatever that miracle may look like. And that's why I believe God did it this way.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Dale, for all of that. That's been really good and really helpful to hear those thoughts on that. And the reminder once again for God's glory and how important that is. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. I trust you found this interesting. If you have any questions, please get in touch with us. Our email address is uppertrosnantbc@gmail.com. Or you can visit our website, which is trosnant.org. And so thank you for watching, and may the Lord bless you.